Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Y'all know with virtual platforms, this always happens, so it's all good. We're here. So welcome to the We Represent 2021 Virtual Exchange Conference, the summer edition. And thank you for choosing to attend today's panel, What It's Like to Do Gilman. My name is Jadalyn Martinez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a first-generation Afro-Puerto Rican woman and received the Gilman back in 2015 to study abroad in Madrid, Spain. I currently work in higher education, supporting first-generation and Pell-eligible students in the TRIO program Student Support Services. And today I will be your moderator for With Gilman. So I'm so excited. We have three lovely panelists with us today who will introduce themselves. So Sasha, do you mind kicking us off?
Sure. Hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sasha Daniels. My pronouns are she, they. I did the Gilman Scholarship in 2016 to Japan. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I currently study in Austin, Texas right now. I'm doing my master's in Germanic Studies.
Thanks, Sasha. Yvette, could you go next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Yvette Gonzalez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a first-gen college student and also grad student, currently at the University of Michigan, doing my PhD in biopsychology. Originally from LA, and I did summer. I did the Gilman over the summer of 2017, and when.
Last but not least, Alexis, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Alexis Reed, and I did Gilman in summer 2017 for Japan as well. And I'm currently a senior at the University of New Orleans, where I am an IDS interdisciplinary studies. So my focus areas are anthropology, sociology, and political science. In addition, I am also a McNair Scholar.
Cool. Yes, trio, McNair. I love it. All right. So how the panel's going to work is the first bit, I have some questions prepared and the panelists are going to answer and share their experiences, advice. And then we'll enter a Q&A where you, the attendees, can get to ask any questions you'd like. Feel free to drop those in the chat. I will remind you as well. So let's get started. So when did you decide to apply for the Gilman program? And why the Gilman? Sasha, do you want to get us started again?
Sure. So I decided to apply for Gilman once I decided to do my study abroad in Japan. I also did a summer program, and I was looking for extra funding for my summer program. And that's essentially kind of when I was looking for the Gilman. And there weren't many scholarship opportunities specifically for summer. The ones that I found were mostly for a year exchange. And so Gilman really kind of like fit the category that I was looking for. So that's when I decided to apply for
it. Yvette, how about you?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I double majored in psychology and Spanish. And for the Spanish major, it was a requirement to study abroad. However, I didn't want to do a whole semester just for like financial constraints. So I decided to do a summer, about 2 months. And with that, I learned more about the Gilman through our study abroad office. They usually had workshops with all the financial aid possibilities. And then that's how I learned about Gilman and decided to apply.
Great. Alexis?
Yeah, so similar to Sasha, I didn't really find opportunities for summer abroad programs, especially for Japan. Scholarships are specific to your country that you're going to, but for Japan, like it was really tricky, especially because it's 4 weeks on site. So it was even shorter. I decided to apply for the Gilman when I decided to study abroad as well. I went into college knowing that I wanted to study abroad. So within my first semester, I just went to my study abroad's office on campus, and I went straight to the to the Japan program I wanted to do. So the coordinator at the time was also the Gilman advisor on campus. So she really was the one who pushed me to apply for it. and I applied for early action. So I applied very early. Like I was a freshman in my first semester applying for the Gilman Scholarship.
Great. So I'm hearing a mixture of things of Gilman being a scholarship that allows you to study abroad in summer, right? That accessibility, and also just like being able to work with applicants like you, Alexis, you're a freshman applying for the Gilman and going to study abroad. That's amazing. So who helped you with your application? Alexis, I know you touched a little bit on that. Can you speak more?
Mm-hmm. So my program coordinator really helped me because she was also the advisor. Helped me, but she always like, you did the work. Because I applied also within a very short time frame. In terms of how long I worked on my application, and in addition to her help, I also went to on a writing center. So I went there, but I made sure to like consistently work with the same person when I booked my session so that I would have consistency. So I had one person from there help me, and then I really had program coordinator help me as well.
How about you, Yvette? Who helped you with your application process?
Okay. So for me, it was we had a study abroad main person who really kind of focused on the Gilman. So he kind of helped me get started. And as far as like proofreading and stuff like that, we usually had in the library, we had like a writing center where they would kind of proofread and help you transition, because that's always what I struggled with. And then for my final edits, I send it to my program coordinator from the study abroad office.
How about you, Sasha?
Similarly to Yvette and Alexis, there's an office on my undergraduate campus that helps specifically for State Department scholarships or any type of opportunity for study abroad. And so I also applied for the Gilman after my first year in college. And this office really kind of helped us, or helped people trying to apply for study abroad with their applications, and just also getting awareness for other opportunities out there. And they were kind of like always my contact point for whenever I had any questions about the scholarship or the application process, and as well as any questions when I was on program.
Similar experiences. I'm hearing, getting support from your study abroad office. They're there for a reason, right? They know the goods, they know the scholarships, so go to them. And also thinking about proofreading, right? You have essays to complete and you want to complete them well. So where can you go? Places like the Writing Center. So thanks for mentioning that. So with that said, working on your application, how long did you spend preparing it, right? So we know the Gilman has multiple components like sending your transcripts and essays and your follow-on service project and detailing that out. So how long did you spend on your application? Alexis, we'll start with you.
I don't exact time frame when I did it. I just know it was maybe 6 weeks max. I just remember like I was kind of pushing it, and again I applied for early action, so technically like I would have had like if I hadn't done that, I would have had more time. But for me, I knew that if I didn't get that award for early action, then I wouldn't have not been able to afford to. That was kind of like my foundation money, as I call it.
I love that foundation money. We need that foundation money. Sasha, how about you?
I want to say similarly. I feel like it was about maybe 4 weeks that I spent on it altogether. I knew that I wanted to study abroad in my spring semester, and I knew that I was aiming for the summertime. And so just in between the spring semester and the summer, I believe it was around 4 weeks, but with the end of the semester and finals and everything as well.
How about you, Yvette?
I think I spent like maybe a month and a half for it, possibly two. I think that because I already knew that I had to study abroad for my major, and I kind of had it planned for the summer, just like I said, for financial reasons. I kind of knew that I had to kind of get ahead of it. And the sessions were pretty early on, so that's kind of what like pushed me to start a little bit early.
Great. So all in all, I hear start early, which is always a good idea because just to have people look over your things, getting transcripts, things like that, just takes a little bit of time. So save yourself the stress. That's what I'm hearing. So did you win the critical language supplement? Sasha, could you speak on this?
Sure. I didn't win the critical language supplement. I did apply for it because Japanese counts as one of the languages for the critical language supplement. However, that was one thing that I was aiming for specifically because the program that I participated in would have fit under that.
Thank you for mentioning that, right? So the Gilman has like the traditional Gilman, right? And then the McCain scholarship, and then also this supplemental, which is the critical language piece. And so, you know, unfortunately, Sasha didn't get it. However, she still got the Gilman. And I think that's just encouraging to just apply, right? You just never know like what you're gonna get. You are worthy, so just please apply. And if you see that you qualify for that critical language component, still apply because that could be thousands of dollars of additional funding for your study abroad if you are to get it. So I appreciate you, Sasha, for answering that. So what advice would you give to someone getting started? So take a prospective applicant, someone wants to study abroad, right? And they're thinking about the Gilman. What advice would you give to them? Alexis, would you like to start us off?
As we mentioned previously, I would definitely say start early. Just because it's the most I guess intensive, I want to say, application I've like program I've ever applied for. It's a very long application, and honestly, like I was really pushing it when I was working on it, and I remember even in one of my letters and recommendation that my program coordinator ended up doing for me years later. She mentioned like I but I didn't think that she would honestly get it because she was applying so late. She was a freshman. Freshmen typically like aren't that, committed to it. It's a time commitment. But she always says like you really put in the work, even though it was a short time. So I would just say apply early and find people who can help you, and definitely locate the Gilman advisor on your campus.
That's great advice. How about you, Sasha?
Kind of in that same vein of applying early, that's the advice that I would give as well, because I feel like if you do have that extra time, you can really not only hone in on your essays and what you want to say as far as like how you want to come across for the scholarship, but also that'll give you more opportunity to plan for your project as well. And yeah, I definitely think that just having that extra time, it'll give you time to proofread, time to have feedback from other people, based on what they may feel that would be best in the application. I've gotten other State Department scholarships as well, and it never hurts to have extra time. More time than is less time. So, like for example, when I was applying for Fulbright, and I got the Fulbright last year, I made sure that I had tons of time for that because I was really dedicated in making sure that it was as perfect as it could be for my application. So time is definitely on your side.
How about you, Yvette?
Yes, just to echo on that, definitely start early, and also like use your study abroad office if you have one as a resource, because they definitely want to get you studying abroad and also financially funded. When I was doing my undergrad and I did my follow-up project, I always offered my email to people for them to like come to me if they wanted like an extra proofread or anything like that. And just kind of as an example, I had one of my friends ask me a couple months ahead, so we were able to kind of work on a Google Doc together, and I was able to give her some pointers based on like my personal statement. And then I had somebody else who kind of asked me last minute, and the one I worked with for a couple months was able to also get a Gilman for the summer. So definitely starting early is always helpful.
Okay, yes, Yvette, giving back, helping prospective applicants. I love that. Also hearing just again, time is of the essence. And like Sasha said, you don't have, you can never have too much early time. It's when you don't have enough time, that's when you're a little bit in trouble sometimes with applications. So thanks for mentioning that. So Sasha, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, and if you want to start us off, were you applying to other opportunities other than Gilman? So that can be while you are applying for your study abroad, that can be after. Want to talk a little bit more?
So for the specific program that I did in Japan, work at the Gilman was the only opportunity that I applied for that program. So essentially, really, if I didn't get the Gilman, then I may not have been able to go. So I'm really glad that I did get it. But I had programs afterwards, and I think that receiving the Gilman in my first year of college really kind of gave me the boost that I needed or the confidence, especially to apply for other things such as Fulbright or another opportunities, maybe even graduate school. And so receiving that Gilman, like just after my first year, I was like, okay, so maybe I can do this. Like I have the credentials to do this. Like let me apply for more opportunities to see, what else can come my way.
Great. How about you, Alexis?
Yes. With regards to applying for other scholarships. Okay. So I did apply for other scholarships. One of the reasons why I chose to study abroad with my university is because they offer scholarships to students for study abroad. I didn't apply for, I'm sorry, I wasn't eligible for all of them because I was a freshman. Like one in particular was like a really high amount one, but they prioritized it like upperclassmen. Um, but I would say I did end up getting SGA on my campus. They offer a scholarship. I did end up winning that one. Um, and I just got creative with how I approached it. So for me, I applied for every scholarship that I was eligible for, and so I did that, and I still needed money. One thing I did was my campus offered, for example, a public speaking contest, and so they had these different prizes. Like it was a high amount of money, and typically people don't like participate in it because, like public speaking can be nerve wracking. I ended up earning $500 from that because I won second place. So that was just another way that I, made money to afford to study abroad. So I would definitely advise like just get creative with how you approach it. Like you may not get scholarships, but there might be, contests or other grants that you can apply for that you can use towards, studying abroad. And then there's also the option of GoFundMe. I know that that may come off like to me, that was like a last minute thing just because I needed money for like textbooks, I needed to buy a laptop, things of that nature. Um, for me at first, it's like I feel like I'm begging, but when I framed it a certain way and I mentioned, I did win these scholarships, I applied for every scholarship I was eligible for. And, I just mentioned the reason why I wanted to study abroad. And like that ended up being a lot of money that I received from that campaign. So I would definitely say GoFundMe. As soon as you know you want to study abroad, I would say create a GoFundMe account campaign if you're comfortable. And do that early and you can leave it open even when you study abroad and people can still donate.
Great. How about you, Yvette?
Yes, similar to Alexis, my undergrad offered specific scholarships for study abroad. However, they were pretty low. I really only ended with my ticket, which was still a big help. But also the program that I did it through, because I was doing a certain amount of credits, and I was there for like a good while as well. They offered an application for a scholarship, so I also applied for a scholarship through the program. So I would also, look to see if the program that you're applying to also has some type of financial aid or scholarship opportunities.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. So I'm hearing, without the Gilman, study abroad may not have been possible, right? I'm also hearing I applied for all these scholarships and I still need more. So how can I get creative, like Alexis said, which that's so awesome. Like going up and doing debate, public speaking, and getting $500, it's amazing. Or things like GoFundMe, definitely, and then talking with your study abroad, seeing if your program offers additional scholarships. It's always so important. That's what they're there for. So just ask and search, Google search, because money is out there. And again, like, feel worthy that, you are worthy of these experiences, these scholarships, and go for them, right? If you don't apply, you'll never get it. So thank you everyone for answering. So let's talk a little bit about the follow-on service project. So a few people have mentioned it, and I think for people who are interested in Gilman, they're like, what is the follow-on project? So can you talk about what did you do? How did you do it? Yvette, we'll start with you.
So one of the things that I talked about for my follow-up service project was that I really didn't see a lot of underrepresented students trying to go abroad, especially like when I was in the study abroad office or in these like workshops and stuff. There was not a lot of people, underrepresented students who were there. So that was kind of my goal for my follow-on project was, so I partnered up with student orgs and kind of did presentations to even expose them to study abroad in the Gilman, and that they could be eligible for it and have some financial help with it as well. And then, like I said, just also offered any help, like personal help to those students as well.
How about you, Alexis?
Yes. So for me, I choosing my follow-on project. My advisor, my program coordinator helped me with that in terms of coming up with an idea for it. But I definitely knew that I wanted to host an event during privateer plunge. So just for context, my university has a University 1001 course. Many universities do. But for mine, their freshman students must attend a certain amount of privateer plunge events. Those events are typically like organizations on campus, trying to recruit. That can be study abroad programs. That can be, like what's on campus, what you have available to you. So for me, I ended up choosing to do international karaoke because karaoke is like the biggest pastime in Japan, more than watching anime. So I ended up choosing to host that event. So students were able, and anybody can attend, even if you weren't a freshman. So students were able to participate in international karaoke, get food. I got funding for that food and everything from my study abroad office, since it was a private plunge event. And then I also had study abroad programs present, so it was recruitment and associate event. So I would say try to do something like that. I would also say, this is my train of thought. Do something that you can realistically accomplish. So again, like my program advisor, she helped me with the logistics of planning that, and like how do you rent a space on campus? How do you order food on campus for an event, etc. So get someone who can assist you if needed, and also do something that you can accomplish and won't be too like labor intensive.
That's great. So I'm hearing, Yvette kind of saw a gap, right, of students being supported in study abroad, or who was going into study abroad and thinking that they could, right? And so she kind of wanted to fill that gap and assist with underrepresented students. And Alexis, you got creative with an event, tying it back to your host country, which is really cool. But also you're talking about how to be realistic with your follow-on service project, right? You have to complete it within, I believe, the first 6 months of your return. And so you want to be realistic about what you can accomplish and have a target audience that you want to talk to with about the Gilman. So I appreciate that. So let's kind of go back to the application process. So thinking about your first draft of your application and then the final draft, what were some major changes you made? Sasha, could you start us off?
So I kind of go through this same process when I do start any drafts or any essays, to where I kind of write as the stream of consciousness comes, and then I proofread it to fit the format or the wording or whatever like the limit may be. And so usually I'll write it and type it exactly how I'm thinking it, and then make sure that I whittle it down to fit exactly what it needs to fit. And then I'll have maybe 1 or 2 people proofread it, just so I have some feedback, but not too much to where it's overwhelming. because you also don't want so much feedback to where you're editing it so much that it's no longer kind of your own style. So that's one thing for sure. I always just make sure I get all my thoughts onto the paper and then scale it back to fit exactly like what it needs to fit before submitting it.
How about you, Yvette?
Yeah, I would say when I was like first applying for scholarships and stuff like that, I was actually the opposite of Sasha, where I would hold back a lot of details. So I definitely recommend Sasha's method to just kind of like let it all out, because otherwise it is really easy to like miss out on those details. And that's something that my advisor was, as he was proofreading and helping me, he was like, just like talk to me about like yourself and stuff. And he's like, oh, you can definitely add this in there, like, or you should definitely add that detail in there. So talking to people, especially if you have a really hard time being more personable during your essays, talking to people that usually do personal statements and stuff like that is very helpful, because they can tell you like what details to not leave out.
How about you, Alexis?
I would say the biggest thing I noticed is that I was more intentional. So in terms of like why I wanted to study abroad, just more intentional about it in my draft. And I also included a stat from which was that the percentage of U.S. Black students who study abroad is about, at the time it was like about less than 6%. Like I know it hasn't moved much since then, especially due to COVID. There just hasn't been an opportunity to study abroad. But for me, in that process, like I started to realize like, oh, like it's not just a New Orleans thing. Like people, like Black people nationally don't really study abroad. So I think that was the first time like it opened my eyes to that. Like when I first decided I wanted to study abroad, like it had nothing to do with that. Like I just go to Japan, and I didn't even consider this, honestly. So eye opening in a good way.
Thank you all for answering. I think I'm hearing, like Sasha's method, letting it all out, streams of consciousness, right? And then kind of going back and editing from there and letting a small group of people look at it, right? Because sometimes, like you mentioned, Sasha, too many opinions is overwhelming. And Yvette, you learning in your process about next time kind of having more details and how your advisor kind of helped coach you in that and kind of learn your why, right? And Alexis too, I hear kind of discovering your personal narrative. Well, why did you want to study abroad? What would it mean for you as a Black woman to study abroad and to study abroad in Japan? And kind of thinking about that a little bit more deeply in your application process. So I'm coming down to my last prepared question. So before I do, I would like to invite our attendees to drop any questions they may have in the chat. I'm sure the panelists will be happy to answer them. So go ahead and drop those in the chat, and I'll just ask this next question. So what are some tips you wish you would have known before applying? Yvette, can you get us started?
Yeah, I think thinking about like it's like I think like 30% of people that get it or something like that, which seems like a small number, but it's actually a pretty big number, I would say, for scholarships. So I think that kind of knowing before that like you really do have a chance of getting, you just need to prepare, and like Alexa says, be more intentional with your purpose and things like that. And I would say that it's definitely doable.
Great, thank you. How about you, Sasha?
There's kind of two tips that I kind of wish that I'd known beforehand. And especially since I was applying for Gilman during my first year, one thing that I've learned throughout my undergrad is just changing my writing style. So I tend to write often just in passive voice, and that's just what comes to me naturally. But I know it's much more intentional and much more direct if you write an active voice. And so that's one thing that I really worked on myself essays, but throughout all of my writings for undergrad as well. is making sure that I have that directness in my speaking and kind of not really dancing around the topic, but really just saying exactly what I mean. And secondly, it was also similar to or something that Alexis mentioned earlier, is that I wish that I had known before to make my plan for the follow-up project a realistic one, because I realized that once I did come back from Japan, it really didn't fit into everything that I was doing with school and any extracurricular. I didn't really feel that I had the time or could really commit to what I proposed in my original application. So that's one thing that I'd wish I'd done before, is like really think about, what you may be getting into once you come back and what really does fit into your time and your schedule, because you will definitely have other things going on.
Great, thank you both. So I was like, I don't see any questions, but I forgot to put the Q&A. So someone asked, how is Gilman different than Fulbright? Does anyone want to answer that?
I can answer that one. So with Fulbright, there's two different types of Fulbright scholarships, or actually, depending on what country you apply for, you have different types of grants. And so I applied for Germany because when I was studied in my undergrad in Japanese. So with Fulbright, there were two different types of grants, where you either a research grant or you were an English teacher. And so I was an English teacher for 2 years with Fulbright, and that put you in the position where you are teaching English to a different type of school. So I was in a German high school, which is grades 5 through 12. So I was teaching English for 12 hours a week to German students. And so in Japan with the Gilman Scholarship, I was kind of in the opposite position, to where I wasn't a teacher at all. I was learning. So the program that I was on was to learn Japanese language and culture. So really, the Gilman funded that opportunity and funded that program for me. Didn't have to teach or assume a role where I was sharing my American culture with Japanese students or anything of that nature, at least not in a professional setting, like as if I were a teacher.
Yeah, and Sasha, can you touch on how the application process is different? Because I know it is.
Yeah, I believe the Fulbright application is a lot longer than the Gilman. The Gilman, I wouldn't say it was fairly short, but I feel because it was for a shorter program, it may not have gone as in-depth as the Fulbright. With the Fulbright, I believe there, just like with, I believe the Gilman, to multiple essays. And specifically for the Fulbright too, you have to have your degree already when you have a Fulbright. So that is another big difference between the two. The Gilman obviously is for when you're in your undergrad or when you're like in the process, but Fulbright, you have to have a degree. So that was a big difference in between kind of where my mindset was with Gilman during my first year, and then after my third year of undergrad, when I applied for a Fulbright, I had my degree. So it was kind of two different spaces.
Thank you, Sasha. So I'm hearing that the Gilman, in terms of time, right? If you're wanting to study abroad in undergrad, the Gilman is a scholarship if you're eligible to apply for, versus the Fulbright is postgraduate opportunities abroad, right? And different, right? In Gilman, you're going to study abroad or do an internship, right? You're learning, you're applying, right? And then in Fulbright, you're applying and you're teaching, or also research too. So another question, did anyone win the critical language section of the Gilman? If not, how would you have written the application differently? So I think, Sasha, this is for you again.
So yeah, critical language supplement. I wanted to, and that's another thing. There's another scholarship, the CLS, which I applied for with Japanese, and I also did not get that one. So I'm curious as to what like I could do with that, because Japanese, like I said, fits into the critical language supplement for both of those scholarships. And so I think now, looking back on it, now that I've gotten Fulbright and other scholarships as well, I probably would be more intentional, similar to what Alexis was saying. I would have more of a, I guess, defined idea of what I wanted to do with the experience. So I think perhaps why I didn't get it with the Gilman is maybe I didn't have a clear cut idea why Japanese would benefit me later on, especially with the fact that I'm a German major. So maybe that's why a lot of people or the staff may not have seen the correlation there. So really kind of just making it clear what you intend to do with that language, with that opportunity. And perhaps that would help with the critical language supplement.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. And see how Sasha has applied to multiple opportunities though? Like, that's what I hope y'all take away with this is that there are so many opportunities beyond just the Gilman out there to study abroad for students who are underrepresented. So please, please apply for them. Even if you don't get them, you can apply again. So thank you, Sasha, for sharing your story. If anyone else has questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I'll be looking there, but I will move on and ask some supplementary questions that I prepared. I want to know why y'all picked the country you picked, right? And so kind of going back to the Fulbright is very specific in that you need to pick like a country and kind of align your goals and your kind of story and narrative while you're preparing the application. But the Gilman, it's a little not as strict, right? They want to know why you're going there, but I want to know personally why y'all chose to go to Japan, Argentina. So whoever wants to go.
I can go. So actually, I was like recently looking back at my application, and as I mentioned, I double majored in psychology and Spanish. So kind of going off of Sasha's point of like being more intentional and like kind of like correlating, like if you would think about it, like psychology and Spanish wouldn't really correlate, especially for study abroad. But what I talked about was that in Argentina, actually the culture is a little bit different with psychology, and so it's not as taboo as in other Latin American countries, especially like where my parents are from in Mexico. It's very taboo to talk about therapy. And so I talked a lot about how I kind of wanted to eventually reach out to psychologists over there and kind of have a discussion on why they thought that their therapy and psychology was different than in other Latin American countries. So that's kind of how I tied psychology and Spanish together and why I wanted to study in Argentina. I also just wanted to study, I've been to Mexico multiple times, so I wanted to study in a different Spanish speaking country. And so, yeah, I think that also helped my application, tying it to both my majors and also how that will help me for my future career.
That's great, Yvette. Thank you. Like, not just a language component, right? Or some familiarity being Latina, Latinx, but also tying it to your studies and kind of differences within the country. That's what I'm hearing from you. Would anyone else like to share?
I can go. So with this, it's interesting because I chose Japan, but I didn't have all these deep reasons for wanting to go. A lot of the people I studied abroad with on my program, they were into anime and manga and potentially cosplay. And I think I ended up bonding with a friend that I made, one of the program participants, because we were kind of to explore in a sense. So I think that's why I initially struggled with my like app because I didn't have these deep reasons, like intrigued by like the advanced technology and like the bullet train. So for me, like I've had like very surface level reasons for wanting to go. I knew nothing about what it meant to be culturally aware. Like I really focused my why I want to go was just because I felt like study abroad was just an opportunity that particularly someone from a public high school in New Orleans, we're told about college, but I was just like I just want to make sure that I take advantage of every opportunity off. So that was reason for wanting to go. I felt like Japan was just an interesting place. I wanted to try something new. I wanted to try something out of my comfort zone, and that's what I did.
Great. So not having this grandiose reason, but just knowing you wanted to study abroad in Japan, kind of feeling like the right fit. I think that's valid too, right? And so I'm glad that you got the opportunity, Alexis.
Thank you.
So I want to know, since y'all have all mentioned kind of language component, have you continued to study the language that you studied abroad from your host country?
I'll go. So when I went to Japan, I actually didn't know the language because it wasn't a requirement. Um, and I got around Japan just fine. Like my on-site orientation really helped me. So we learned how to take the bus and the train. We had a bus. Eventually, like I was commuting on my own within this own like this new country where I don't know the language, but I just knew the customs. You just really learn to pick up class in Japan because it's such a rule-driven society. But I would say by the time I came back, I really felt like I would have gotten more of it if I knew some of the language. So for me, I've been trying to figure out like I learn the language. Like ever since I've gotten back, I wanted to learn. My university does offer Japanese as courses, and I think as a minor. But for me, that I realistically would not be able to take that on as a minor. And I did try taking a class just as felt like that particular professor's learning like teaching style wasn't for my learning style. So I'm still in the process of like trying to figure out like how to learn Japanese, but also be intentional like, well, what would I do with it? I had a professor who told me when I was in Japan, like, you guys, it was after we came back from a baseball game. It was me and my friend, and he was like, you guys should really try to learn a critical neat language just in general. He was like, it's great to know Spanish, it's great to know French. A lot of people know it in America. Like, you should really try to learn a critical need language. So that kind of stuck with me, and I felt like of all the languages I want to learn Japanese in Japan in the future. We do have a New Orleans Japan Society of New Orleans, no, New Orleans Society of Japan. I could be getting it wrong. So I'm reaching out to them for advice, just to figure out like how would that even benefit me professionally, and again, just like how can I learn independently.
Great. Anyone else want to share their language journey?
So when I started undergrad, I actually didn't intend on studying Japanese in undergrad. I knew that I wanted to study German. That's what I went to school for, was to focus on German. But I actually ended up studying Japanese by accident. And when I went to study, or when I went to schedule my classes my first semester, and the person helping me making my classes, they say, oh, because you're in this department, you need a second language in addition to German. I didn't understand why I needed a second language, but they just told me that I did. And so I said, okay, well, let me just take Spanish, because I grew up speaking Spanish and I figured it'd be easy for me. So I said, well, let me just take Spanish. All the Spanish classes were full. And so then I asked them what my options were. And they said, well, you have Italian and Japanese. And I didn't want to learn Italian. So I said, like I watched anime with my brother when I was younger. Like I used to be into like some of the culture when I was younger. So let me just learn Japanese. And then I took it for a year and ended up really liking it. And oddly enough, my school has a program with a sister school in Japan. So we had a lot of Japanese students that came to my university during my first and second semester. So I had tons of friends in the school that I went to study to Japan in Osaka. This first year where I had accidentally learned Japanese and then ended up made all of these friends, I said like, okay, I really want to go there. I really want to focus with the language. And so especially after being there and really utilizing what I learned in the first year of Japanese, I definitely wanted to stick with it. And so once I came back to the US, I finished out my minor in Japanese. I did 2 more years of Japanese. And there's oddly enough a connection between Japanese and German. And so when I did my Fulbright, I got placed in a city that was maybe about 45 minutes away from like one of the largest Japanese hubs in Europe. So going there, I was able to use Japanese in Germany, and it was kind of just like this nice little melting pot of both of my languages from undergrad. So that's one thing that I also am like continuing with, just because like there's that clear German Japanese connection to me now, and so it's like kind of perfect in a way.
Wow, talk about the universe, like just making it happen for you. And like by accident, and then kind of just like seeing how it all linked in your Fulbright experience, and just, you know, took you to a place that maybe you wouldn't have thought about going to had it the Spanish class has not been full. Very cool that you're multilingual. And Alexis, I appreciate you talking about your language journey and how you're still deciphering how, you know, how will this benefit me, but also how can I get started or start it again, and incorporate it into my learning, you know, because languages are important. So that's great. Again, I will invite people to drop questions in. Yvette, did you want to go?
So like I mentioned before, you know, I currently do like biopsychology now. So I grew up speaking Spanish. That was my first language. So I went to kindergarten. But over the years, I have definitely, especially going to college and stuff, have definitely, my first year there, definitely lost a bit of it. I took Spanish in high school to really learn how to actually write, quote unquote, properly. And so when I was in college, they were like, I wanted to continue really learning, not only to write, but also more about like the readings, the literature, and a little bit more of the different cultures as well. And so I went to my Spanish advisor, and she was like, well, you already have some credits, so, you know, continue. You should probably double major because it's not going to be that many classes. And so that's how I ended up deciding to do that. And the Gilman also really helped because when I applied to the summer program, I applied for a program that was about 2 months, and it also offered me 12 credits. So I was able to really get ahead on those credits over the summer, and that's also will ultimately help me graduate in 4 years with those 2 majors. But I've continued to kind of blend it. Now I do, you know, research in addictions, which is completely different, and I don't use Spanish for that. But my Spanish major has helped me now to get a fellowship to tutor children who learn English first but want to continue learning Spanish because they're also Latino, and so they want their parents want them to learn the language, but they don't have as much exposure. And so I work tutoring them, and that so I've basically been able to still continue to use my major because it's kind of like my second passion.
So, you know, coming from a background where you were already speaking the language, but noticing there was some things you wanted to improve on, like writing, and being able to take that within undergrad and also be intentional with your program, and just relating it back to how it impacts you still professionally, right? So that's really, really great. So I guess I want to learn a little bit more about during your Gilman and after, kind of what did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about being an American and on all the identities that comes with it abroad, being a Gilman scholar? What did you learn about yourself during that time? Did Alexis? No worries.
Okay. Thing I learned is just like I'm capable of being independent. Sometimes mind myself of that in a sense. So being in New Orleans and commuting alone is completely different from being in Japan, one of the safest countries, and commuting alone. So in the I just remember my mom and my sister would always say like, don't ever go anywhere by yourself. Make sure you always have someone with you when I'm in New Orleans. And I also recognize now like I was really a baby in Japan. Like I was just like 19. So I understand like my mother and my sister's concern. My sister's the eldest, by the way. So I would say eventually observe like my taking trips by themselves. So like I can't think of, so we were in Kyoto and they took a trip alone to, I can't think of where it was. Kind of, but still, I was just like, I just realized I was kind of like missing out. So I just started my own. I never really told them that, but I just realized like, I'm capable of being independent and travel and commuting by myself. I don't need somebody all the time. If I want to go somewhere, I'm in one of the safest countries, I can just go. Um, so that was something I observed about myself, just like being independent. Say the second thing I observed about myself, that was the first time I really considered myself to be American. Because when you're in Japan, it's like you're just seen as American. And I know that that may not be everyone's experience who's in Japan. And I was only there for 4 weeks. So someone who was there for 4 months, a completely different answer. For me, I would say that was the first time I really felt like I'm just an American. And I realized that like I had American views. And I think I just realized like how influential America is in other countries, even another developed country, which is kind of like freakish at times. Like there's kids and McDonald's everywhere. So I would say that was the biggest thing for me. Whereas in America, it's like there's intersectionality. It's like I'm black, but in Japan, I just felt like I'm an American woman, and it was really eye opening in that sense of identity.
Great, thank you for sharing. Would anyone else like to share?
I would say for me, it was when I was there, there's actually not a lot of Mexicans that go to Buenos Aires, Argentina. Not really sure why, but when I would go, they were like all intrigued because they're like, we don't really see a lot of Mexicans here. So it was actually interesting that with me, that's kind of the first identity they always associated with me, especially because, obviously it's Spanish speaking country. So I was always speaking Spanish there and they would recognize my accent. But I would also notice kind of like a shift in their perception of me once I did tell them that I was American and that I grew up in America. So it was kind of interesting to kind of see that, especially during that time, because it was like freshly off our 2016 election. So people definitely had opinions about that. And I will say that it was interesting to have those conversations. And I think it really helped to kind of also see that, the US is kind of like always on the news, and especially within the last 4 years. And I didn't really think about that until I went there. It was kind of like eye-opening to really see like how much other countries know about us, but how little we really know about them, especially news-wise. So that definitely opened my eyes. And now when I came back, I was more intentional about like looking at international news and like kind of focusing on that.
Interesting. So I'm hearing from Alexis like that piece of independence, that piece I think too of safety in Japan versus the US, and feeling comfortable being alone there versus in New Orleans specifically. Also realizing like that people perceived you as an American, whereas your identities look differently, right, in the United States. And Yvette, kind of the opposite, where they were identifying you as being like part of the Latinx community, right? But then that added layer of finding out, oh, you're American, like interesting, and let's talk about all that's going on right now. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting experience. Definitely you learn a lot about yourself and where you come from too, and how people perceive that, right? So I kind of want to go back to, I don't remember who mentioned it, but just like family piece. So I feel like, I think it was you, Alexis, who you're giving a statistic of Black folks who study abroad. Like it's not very high, and we're not sure if it's changed or not. And so I think there might be a cultural piece, right? There might be a family piece to that. So I want to know about how your families, your caretakers, your social circle kind of took this news of you wanting to study abroad, How did they feel? Were they supportive? Did they help?
Go first. I don't remember everyone's initial reaction, but I remember at the beginning stages, my mom was just like, "How are you gonna pay for it?" That was just her biggest thing, and she's like, she's very big on me about loans, so that was another thing for me. Like loans just wasn't an option because I just had that drilled in my head, like don't take out loans to study abroad. So I would say initially, like, didn't necessarily feel supported. But I also had just this inclination of like I was just like I'm going. I think because I was working on my Gilman application with my advisor, and like bit of students from UNO who study abroad often, like around me, I didn't necessarily see a lot of Black people per se, but I still saw a lot of students at my university who did it. I was also I did a class for a United Nations conference. So a group of students from my university go every year. I applied to do that as well. My freshman spring, um, I New York for that conference, but also prior I had a course to prepare for that, and then in the summer I studied abroad. So I would say I also had support from people who were in Model UN with, just because one they're just like similar to people, they have this desire for cultural awareness, and things like that. And two of the people who did Model UN with me, they also studied abroad in the same program that I did prior. So I really had a lot of support from them as well. I would say once I knew I was going to receive a lot of funding, I would say my family was more so on board for it. They were still kind of anxious, just going so far away. I remember my sister was like, if something happens to you, like, we can't afford to go to Japan to, like come get you or something. So that was really a concern for them, just like affordability and just being so far. I recently learned, apparently my mom was reaching out to people in the family to see if we had family stationed in Japan. We did not. So I think for her, she was just concerned about my safety being.
Thanks for sharing. Yvette, would you like to share?
Sure. I would say for me, my parents are very traditional, and I'm also the youngest and the only girl of my family. So going to college 2 hours away was already a struggle to kind of get them on board with that, especially because I would have to dorm since it was so far away and I couldn't really exactly be commuting. So that was very hard for them. So when they learned that I was trying to go to Argentina, which is the farthest I've been with them was like Mexico. So they were very concerned as well about safety and just about how far it was and the fact that they couldn't just, drive 2 hours to see me if anything happened. That was really hard for them as well. And then also like, because one, like nobody in my family had really gone to college. Even just the idea of studying abroad was an extra layer of that. So it is kind of interesting, like how Alexa said, you see people in your school doing it, but your family doesn't really understand that aspect of it. So kind of like having to explain like, this is something that I need to do for my degree, but the fact that I had to do it in a Spanish speaking country, their first reaction was, well, why aren't you going to Mexico? So that was really hard for them to understand because they were like, well, you can always go to Mexico. You can stay with your aunts, So that was a really, really hard thing to explain to them. But it's kind of the thing where you just kind of have to just do it and commit. I knew I was going to apply for funding and they weren't going to be able to help me financially anyway. So it was kind of on me to finance it. So that kind of gave me some leverage in a way of like, I'm going to be able to finance it. So I'm going to go basically. And it's really hard to do that, but it's kind of the only way to do it, especially with, very traditional parents, because otherwise you will kind of stay stuck.
So I think It was kind of different. Well, I mean, similar to Yvette too, where it's like I'm kind of just gonna do it regardless. After you get to a certain point, you know you're determined that if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. By the time I'd gone to Japan, I'd already actually studied abroad before that. So I got a Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange Scholarship, which is another State Department scholarship. I got that straight out of high school, and that was to study in Germany for a year. That actually was my first time out of the country when I was 17. So I just graduated high school, and I was really excited to get that scholarship. But when I was younger, so maybe like a middle school, that's when I was interested in traveling to Japan. And I brought the idea up to my mom before, and similar to Alexa, it was kind of just like, how are we going to pay for that? Because you're like, I come from a low income family. My mom was a single, so she was like, okay, my child has these big dreams about going halfway across the world, like, and I'm just trying to keep the house together. So I think then she kind of like let me dream about it, but didn't want to like break those realities to me because she didn't want to like crush my dreams when I was like only 13. But then when the idea became more feasible, when there were scholarships and I was able to apply to go abroad to Germany, she was actually really supportive of it, especially because the idea or the scholarship that I got was a full scholarship. So when the possibility came up that I could travel and then that we wouldn't have to pay for it at all, she was extremely supportive and she really wanted me to do it, especially because my mom was in the military and she'd also lived in Germany at one point. So she wanted me to have a similar experience as well. And she knew I didn't want to join the military. So she said, this is an idea, or this is a way for you to go abroad, see another culture, see another language. And in that sense, it was actually kind of better because I would be able to live with a German family, go to a German school, and so, versus the military where like she was on base around other Americans and still kind of in a bubble. So she was extremely supportive. She said that that was the best opportunity that she had and was in the military going abroad. So she really wanted me to have the same thing as well.
Thank you all for sharing. It's the persistence for me. That's what I'm hearing. The persistence, the convincing that I'm going to search for scholarships, I'm going to be okay, and just being open to those conversations, right? Because family's going to be concerned. You're their child, and they want to make sure you're safe and okay and happy. So I do see one more question in the chat, so if we could answer it pretty quickly, and then I'm just going to wrap up as we have another kind of networking / break after this. So the question is, if you could study abroad in a different country, what would it be? So like lightning round, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I always wanted to study abroad in Italy. Like even when I was journaling, I, I was journaling while I was in Japan, and there's just a lot of Western influence in Japan. I always wanted to go to Italy, especially because I learned that my great grandmother's grandfather or grandfather was an Italian man who moved to New Orleans and married a black woman. So ever since I've learned that some of my ancestors are Italian, I've been intrigued by it, and also I feel like I would just love the food there. So I've always wanted to go to Italy, always wanted to go to the beaches there, still on my bucket, and the world kind of reopens.
For me, the first one that comes to mind is Ghana. I went to Ghana for 2 weeks and I was absolutely in love with it. And in Germany, I had a lot of friends of Ghanaian descent and I really fell in love with the culture, fell in love with the food. And after going there for 2 weeks, I thought to myself, like, 2 weeks it went by so fast and I would love to actually immerse myself in the culture, spend an extended amount of time here to really like get to know the people, stay here for a longer amount of time and not have to count the days until I leave. So I really would love to spend an extended amount of time there just to really kind of immerse myself in Ghanaian culture, learn the language because it's a very difficult language to learn, but I'm determined to learn it because I would love just to be able to communicate with everyone there. So I definitely I would choose to go to Ghana for sure.
The first one that comes to mind for me is Chile. Mostly because when I wanted to study abroad, I definitely wanted to go somewhere in South America since I had never really been exposed to a lot of cultures from there. And when we were in Argentina, a couple of the people that were in my program ended up going to Chile since it was like very close. And they look really nice, and like they had a good time, and they really have like a lot of naturey spots that I would like to visit, especially like the mountains and stuff like that. So that's definitely a place that I would think about.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. And Alexis, that's actually a little place in Italy in the back. I recommend. It's very beautiful. I would also love to go to Ghana and Chile. Definitely on my list. So I want to wrap things up. We are at time. So thank you so much, especially to our panelists, Yvette, Sasha, and Alexis, for sharing your time, your experiences, your advice, and words of wisdom for our attendees. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the attendees for coming to this session. I'd like to invite our panelists, if they feel comfortable, to drop in their LinkedIn or a way to connect with them. If anyone has any questions, I will do the same. And then the next event is a coffee break networking time for about 15 minutes. And then it's followed by an identity panel, and this one's on LGBTQ. And there are other Identity Abroad panels today on BIPOC folks and persons with disabilities. So make sure to tune in, they're gonna be really good. And then also please make sure to complete the post-conference survey, which will be sent out on Monday, June 28th, so next Monday. And you could be entered to win some really cool We Represent swag. So I would do the survey. And also it helps the conference to improve. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of the We Represent conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.